A couple of years ago, I believe it was 2011, my wife gave me a book for my birthday, a book about the Crimean War. A conflict that I didn't know very well at the time, if at all, really. And I was fascinated. I think it's a fascinating conflict from so many points of view, militarily, from the point of view of the involvement of the media, politics, European politics involved, a lot of interesting stuff. The Charge of the Light Brigade, great war, really, in the measure in which an event where a lot of people die, of course, can be called great. Historically, very interesting and relevant. And back in the day, I started looking for games about it because I wanted to explore it in the war game format, which I find so productive when you're trying to understand an historical conflict. And there weren't many available. Definitely not a conflict that has been the subject of many war games. But there was a war game on Board Game Geek that seemed very interesting, and it was called Bloody Steppes of Crimea. The point is that, the problem is that back in the day, in 2011, it was already there, but it looked like it was dead in the water. There were no news, nothing about it. It looked like one of those projects that would never really come to completion. And yet, I'm glad that for once, appearances may deceive, and just when you lost the hope, you realize that there is no reason to, because the game was released. The game did come out. Bloody Steppes of Crimea, 1854, published by the Polish publisher Strategemata. And it includes 3 scenarios about pivotal battles of the Crimean War, Alma, Balaclava, and Inkerman, each with a different map. Lot of components, a lot of stuff. A very, I'll tell you right now, very serious endeavor from the point of view of the publisher, but especially from the point of view of the designer. I can tell you this is a game that there was a lot of work that went into it. It's a pretty complex game, definitely a war gamer's war game. Let me show you how it works. This is one of the 3 maps that come with the game. This is the map for the Battle of the Alma River. On the other side of the same large sheet of paper, we have the map for the Battle of the Balaclava. There's also another map for Inkerman. You get a sense of how these maps look. They're not super pretty, but not bad looking either. I guess they're just a little less pretty than your average American or French map, but many independent publishers have maps of this kind. For example, Italian maps, maps from Italian war games very often look kind of like this. Very functional, no problem there, really. The game comes with a pretty substantial assortment of counters. The counter tray is not included with the game. I added it, and the counters are not super thick, but they're glossy, which is nice. Makes them nice looking, but also makes the stacks a little slippery because, well, since they're glossy, they may easily slide around on one another and fall from the stack. But overall, the game is definitely playable from the point of view of the components. Now, let's have a closer look at the units involved in the game. Each side will have commanders. There is a commander-in-chief and then other commanders lower in the chain of command. Their position in the chain of command is indicated by the number of stars that they have. And this is a game where, yes, you do use a system of orders. So there is a chain of command. Basically, there are orders that irradiate from the commander-in-chief, reach intermediate leaders, and from there are projected onto the leaders lower in the chain of command, and finally to the military units. So there will be orders that come from here and need to be recorded, and when received, respected. There is also a possibility for the player to try to have intermediate lower commanders in the military chain try to change orders based on the changing tactical situation, basically taking the initiative. When you want to send an order from a commander-in-chief, the commander-in-chief can change orders of of units automatically within a radius of 3 hexes. If trying to change orders between 4 and 10 hexes, or by changing orders of other leaders between 4 and 10 hexes, then the Commander-in-Chief needs to use a rider that is sending a dispatch. Within that range between 4 and 10, all you do is you take one of your available dispatches. There is a number of them that each leader, each Commander-in-Chief has, and you place this on the turn track on the next turn. That simply means that's an abstract way of representing the fact that for that turn, a notional rider is riding back and forth, and in a full turn it will be able to ride where it needs to go, deliver the order, and go back. So it will be available next turn. You get it back next turn. If the dispatcher is riding more than 10 hexes away, if the target is more than 10 hexes away from the Commander-in-Chief, then you actually place it on the map and you move it until it reaches the location where it needs to go. As I said, it is also possible for intermediate leaders to try to change their orders. So leaders that can do that have a small number here printed in that triangle. That is the independence rating. And the independence rating tells you how likely they are to be able to change their order. You roll a die. Everything in this game is resolved by rolling a d10, and if you roll equal to or lower than the independence rating, then the leader is able to act independent and to change the order. There are 3 main orders here, which are attack, allows you to move towards your opponent and perform all sort of nasty violent attacks against the opponent. Defense, which does not allow you to move but allows you to defend, to counterattack. And force march, which allows you to move fast around the board. This is for the orders, but actually there is more than that, because this is how the orders are sent around. You also need to record the orders. Each group will be recorded. Each group, the order of each group is recorded on this sheet of paper here. Each side has one such sheet of paper for each battle. So each scenario comes with 2, 1 per side. You will probably want to make photocopies of this one like I did. This is the original, or even better if you laminate them. Because as you can see, here's how it works. You will have groups grouped by the leader. So this is the unit, the military group that is commanded by Scuderi. And then here, each line in this graph here represents a counter. Then you have a number of strength points. This is where you record the number of strength points that the unit has. The number of strength points is not indicated on the counter for the unit. Simply when the unit represented by a counter takes a hit, then you go to the corresponding line on this player right here, and you cross off a line, and you cross off a box until the unit is completely destroyed. This is for the strength points that they have and how you record the loss of strength points. When you lose a strength point in this game, it's gone. This diagram here, this hexagonal diagram here, is where you record the order. You place a letter in the X indicating A for attack, D for defense, and F for force march. You also, in case of an order that implies movement, indicate the vector. That is, you draw 2 lines across 2 hex sites, and those indicate the range, the general direction in which the order needs to be resolved. So if you're saying attack, you can't just say go and attack somebody. The attack order needs to also indicate the direction. Suppose that I want to send an order that says attack, then I write A, and then I want to send them in this direction, then I cross this hex edge, this hex edge, and this one here, and now the units in this group need to move in this general direction as projected out of the hex in which they are. Units always need to be facing one of the corners of the hex in which they are, with some exceptions for certain formations and certain conditions, but usually they need to always be facing. They can change their orientation, but the vector remains important in the definition of the direction of the order. So you can see we're starting to see a little bit of detail here. Strength points that are tracked individually for each counter. orders that need to be changed, replaced. You need to determine when an order has been fulfilled. For example, if a unit moved enough to fulfill the distance, because the order may also indicate a distance, and you place a number in the vector area that you determine. You also write down a number indicating the number of axes that the unit must travel. So there's that element. As for the units themselves, they're represented by counters such as this one, which indication of the group they belong to right there on top. But then we also have here, you see this little line here, and you see these little lines here. They represent different states of the units. The unit, when in line, is indicated by the unit with the counter with this side face up. And if you're changing the formation into a column, then you simply flip the counter to this other side here. Different units will have slightly different formations available to them, but basically between different types of line formation and different types of column. These are the two basic states that you have on infantry units. If you want to use skirmishers to produce skirmishers out of a main group, then you simply replace the main counter with other counters that indicate the skirmish formation. Different formations will have benefits, limitations, advantages to them. And here we have another player aid with information that relates to the formation. Different formations for infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Well, artillery doesn't really have that, but you still have information indicated on this player aid. As you can see, the formation may affect the formation requires different amounts of movement points to form. You always spend movement points when you are changing from one formation to the other. You have a basic number of movement points that you receive depending on the formation. Changing the orientation of the counter by 60 or by 180 degrees. 120 degrees is a double 60-degree turn. May cost, depending on the formation. And again, you see here, strength point limit, that is the stacking limit. Salvo cost, this is a game where firing costs movement points, and that part actually is not influenced by the formation, at least for our friends, the infantry people. And then we have the strength in the fire combat. This is what strength in melee was always the same, but strength in combat, that is what is vastly affected by the formation. Because of course, if you are in line in a company column or in a perfect line, you will be able to fire at different rates with different volumes of fire, as opposed to when you're in column, then fire is not what you're good at. So if you are in company column, then you can fire with a third of your stack, but no more than 4 strength points. Line is the best one because you can fire with up to 4 strength points from your line at the same time. Skirmish, you have other types of limitation and other limitations for other types of formation. So as you can see, there is a bit of information that you need to take into account, including, finally, we didn't get to talk much about that, the information that is printed on the counters. Yes, on the counters you have the indication of the units that counter represents, the formation, as we said, for example, line or column, and then we have these other 2 numbers here. This number here is morale, which is used for morale checks. And then there is a number or 2 numbers or sometimes 3 numbers for artillery here. And that indicates the modifiers based on distance. Usually infantry has a zone of control, you should call it zone of influence really, of 2 hexes. That means it can fire up to 2 hexes away. And when it does so, it receives different types of benefits, bonuses, and modifiers. For example, here we have a counter that tells us that when this unit is firing at 1 hex adjacent, it has a modifier of -1. When firing 2 hexes away, it has a modifier of 0. Other units that had a symbol here simply cannot fire at that distance, so they have shorter distance. If artillery has a longer range, but again, it has modifiers printed on the counter indicating the modifier that is going to be used in combat when resolving fire. So, summarizing, a unit is represented by the formation indicated by the state of the counter. Morale, fire modifier represented their strength points that are kept track here on this player aid, and the order that the unit has and must follow. Wow. And we're not done yet talking about the preliminary stuff before the turn starts. Well, then actually, once you have the preliminary stuff, the turn is not that complicated, really. This is a chit pool game. That means that each side will receive a certain number of activation chits that are placed in a cup. Each side has its own specific cup with activation chits, and the chits indicate different groups that will be activated when the chit is randomly drawn. You may also have blank chits that simply do not activate anybody, and the way in which the counter pool is manipulated each time. Well, there's a procedure to determine how many of the blank sheets you have, etc., etc., etc. Each turn, a player will have the initiative. You roll and apply modifiers to determine who has the initiative. The player with the initiative gets to choose a chit out of their cup. They don't have to draw it randomly. And then that player can activate the formation indicated by the chit that was just randomly drawn. So, like in all games that use similar mechanisms, you know you'll get to activate your people, but you do not know the order in which they will activate. What is also interesting is that after you activate, so the first player activates a unit, a group deciding which one it is. And then you alternate drawing randomly. It is possible, however, after you drew and activated your group, that you may try to sustain the initiative, to gain momentum. That is, you may activate two groups in a row. To do so, after you activated the group that you received randomly, or if you drew a blank, then you can still try to activate a group as your quote-unquote second activation, because the blank cheat that you drew gave you nothing. So if you're trying to gain a second activation or a first activation after a blank, you choose a commander, you roll and test their independence, and then if you're successful, you're able to activate that group. Now, finally, what happens when you do activate your groups? They need to follow the orders, but technically, they basically, they move and attack, or they react. This is cool. In this game, you have a vast system of reactions that you perform when a unit of the opponent enters the zone of control of your unit, which, remember, for many units, the zone of control extends to 2 axes away for infantry. It may extend further for artillery. When an opponent enters a zone of control, maybe zone of influence would be a better term here, but this is how it's called. When a unit of the opponent enters zone of control of your unit, which, remember, is based on the facing of the unit, then the passive player, the non-active player, can perform a couple of actions, can change orientation, can change formation, can counterattack, can fire. And to me, firing with artillery, firing with infantry is really important because it really represents some of the main elements of this war. This was the war where we had the charge of the light brigade. So the idea that when you're charging is when you're scared, and when you have it hard, it should be there and is represented in this game. Now, how do we resolve combat? We'll talk about combat because movement is, well, guess what? You move up to the number of movement points that a unit has, and movement is modified by terrain. You have detail, player aid with terrain effects. Everything is very detailed in this game. Terrain effects for movement, and then on combat, as you can see, a lot of different things that may apply. But talking about how to resolve combat, there are various types of fire. Of course, everything is detailed in this game. Artillery with different charts based on the distance of the target, and infantry fire. These are the main types of fire. Then we also have melee and cavalry charges. As for Infantry Fire, how it works, finally something that is pretty straightforward once we have the basics down. You roll your die, you apply a lot of possible modifiers that may depend on terrain, the strength modifier of the units, a target formation modifier, depending on the formation of the target. Certain formations will be easier to hit, type of target, distance, and facing. And then finally, you combine all the modifiers, you roll the die, and you cross-reference that with the morale of the firing unit. And then you will have a result. Actually, it's something interesting. This is one of those games where negative results are good, positive results are bad. I sometimes get confused about why that is so, but this is so here. The result, once you cross-reference that, may be nothing, or it may be a loss of strength points, and or a loss of movement points. The loss of movement points and strength points are the strength points that the opponent loses are the numbers before the slash. Movement points that are lost are the one right after the slash. And movement points, of course, are important when they're lost only if you are firing during your reaction phase. When the opponent is moving, you're firing, the opponent loses movement points and may not be able to go wherever it is that they want to go. So you apply the loss of strength points and possibly movement points, and you record that. And the artillery fire works in similar ways, just with different sets of modifiers. As for melee, this is interesting. Melee is resolved in an unusual way because it is basically a series of morale checks between the units that are involved in melee. Basically, the attacker takes a morale check just to see if they are able to attack at all. Morale check, roll a die, and you need to roll equal to or lower than the morale of the stack that is attacking. Multiple stacks may combine in a single attack against a single X, but they need to roll for morale separately, and they may not all end up being part of the attack. So the first morale check in the melee is taken by the attacker just to determine if the attack happens at all, and in case of multiple people, multiple stacks, who is going to attack exactly. Once you have the number of and the exact identity of the attackers that attack, then the defender takes a morale check. And morale checks in melee have, guess what, a long list of possible modifiers. Pretty daunting at the beginning, but it also adds a lot of detail and flavor. Terrain, strength ratio, that is when you were wondering, why is strength going to be part of this? Of course, a large number defending against a small number, a large number attacking a small number should be taken into account. This is where that is done. Situations that may be already in place, facing, formation, again, different types of melee between different groups will be affected in different ways. So this is how it works. You take all the modifiers into account, and you make the attacker take a morale test. The morale is passed. All right. Then the defender needs to take a morale check. If it is passed, the defender is disorganized. Yes, being just disorganized is the best case scenario. If it is failed by 1 or 2 points, if the morale check for the defender is failed by 1 or 2 points, then the defender is disorganized and also loses strength points. If it is if it is failed by 3 or more points, the defender loses more strength points, and it is also routed, which is pretty bad. Then the defender starts moving away, and it's very vulnerable. Anything that happens to a routed unit from that point on is devastating, catastrophic, forces the unit to lose a lot of points. That is really when you want to spend actions and movement points to reorganize your units as fast as possible. After the defender has taken the morale check, the attacker takes a second morale check. So there are 3 morale checks for each melee. 1 for the attacker, 1 for the defender, and then 1 for the attacker again. The attacker takes into account all of the modifiers again,
things may be different now because of the strength ratio that changes throughout the combat. Roll, take the morale check for the attacker, and the attacker, just like the defender, may just be disorganized, or if successful in the morale check at the end of melee, or disorganized and losing some strength points, or losing strength points and be routed 2 in case of a really bad failure on the morale check. Then you also have cavalry charges, you have a couple of other procedures, and cavalry charges, counter charges, square formations. I'm not gonna go in detail into those. I just want to give you a general sense that you have a general activation phase when orders that have been sent to the chain of commands are implemented based on the random activation given by the action sheets. Units move, attack, react to each other, fire, clash into melee route. At the end of the action phase, you will have a reorganization phase where routed units will attempt to rally. The turn is over, and you repeat the sequence into the next turn until one of the 2 sides emerges as the winner based on the victory conditions of the scenario that you're playing.
Our gamers war game, no doubt. This is one tough mouthful to chew and to swallow, even for the seasoned war gamer. I would say it really takes a grognard. It takes a grognard to play a grognard's game, and this is one for this specific group of strange people that just can't have fun with simpler hobbies. They can, but then all of a sudden they're like, why don't I spend an entire weekend learning about incredibly complex rules that will allow me to play a very complex game that probably very few people want to play with me, and maybe I'll play it solo. Why do we do this? Because if the game is good, there is a payoff. The payoff is in the sense of realism and detail that you have in understanding the historical event that is portrayed in the game, and also the sense of intellectual challenge, for the very reason why people buy 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles instead of buying the picture. It is more fun to have the challenge of putting it together. And here also the challenge results, the challenge of learning the game and then of implementing the procedures. At the beginning, it's a pain. Trust me, there are no 2 ways about it. Going through all of those steps and remembering them, picking up the rulebook constantly, doing sure that you're implementing things right, it's tough. But once you get past it, then you have a game that feels very realistic, feels very detailed, and it's actually engaging intellectually to play because of the challenges that it presents. I'm not talking about the procedural challenges anymore. You move from those to the challenges of playing effectively, of achieving your objectives, of sending out the right orders at the right time, of making the various parts of your army work together organically, of exploiting the turn structure, not in a gamey way. I don't like games where you can play the system more than play the game. Here you're exploiting the opportunities given to you by the turn structure, especially by the reaction system, but you're not doing it with the feeling that you're cheating against the system. To start with, those rules, the reaction rules, were placed there obviously to give you a sense of fluidity, to give you a sense of an ongoing action, and to give you a sense of how things happen from both sides at the same time. One side is not taking a nap as the other side is advancing. And since also this conflict, the Crimean War in particular, is remembered, but a few people don't remember it, because of the charge of the Light Brigade, the most iconic moment of the war is a moment in which people are taking fire as they are bravely advancing against the opponent. So here the fact that you have reaction fire, you also have other maneuvers, captures the historical event, captures even the iconic quality of the most famous event from the war. And again, it's a lot of work to make the rules work, to learn them and then to implement them as you become familiar with them, but it really pays off in the level of detail, satisfaction and realism that you have here. There aren't many games about the Crimean War out there, and now we have one that it's about this much neglected subject, and it really allows us to have a very good sense, a very good detailed sense of the battles and of the dynamics that happen in the battles. Range, different type of troops, you have the Zouaves, without the Zouaves it's not the same, different type of troops, different type of terrain, situations. It really does what serious wargaming should always do, which is to give you a powerful feeling of historical immersion. There are games that do that more elegantly, no doubt. This is a game that does so with a lot of detail, a lot of rules, but they don't feel all that fiddly. Even though as I was playing them, I felt like I was just adding layers over layers in this sort of strange, I don't know, multi-layer sandwich without a single identity, a sandwich with a little bit of everything. As you read the rulebook, you almost get the sense that the designer was like, what else can I add? What else can I put in? What other mechanic that I like I'm gonna squeeze in the system? And yet, then when you take the time to play the game, the mechanics do not feel gratuitous. They do not feel they have been added there just for the sake of it. They do go together in ways that make sense, that dovetail nicely, elements that dovetail from previous ones in the turn, and I should say in the logical organization of the design. So design that makes sense. I don't know that it's gonna be a design that is gonna have much currency, that it will become a classic, simply because the more restrictions you put to a design, the more non-popular things you add to a design. Non-popular being something that is, well, not popular, but not actively unpopular. The more non-popular elements you add to something, the more the audience for that something shrinks. And here you are getting really into a bottleneck that you restricts the audience so much when you take two elements into account. One is the game is not about the most famous popular game, the conflict in the world. For some people, that is totally exciting, precisely because I want to know something more. Other people will want to have, I only have 124 games about Normandy. When is a new one coming? Because I haven't played one in the last 72 hours. I want a new one to add to my collection. So some people prefer to add to already very popular topics. And then, so you have that element that narrows the audience. The topic is not really a crowd pleaser, and at the same time you also have a level of complexity which is past that of a beginner gamer. It is past that of a casual gamer. It really takes somebody who is committed to wargaming to digest the design and to make it work. So I don't know how many people will watch my video, and I don't even know how many people that will watch my video will want to give this game a try. It's not a game for everybody. It's not a game for even most people or for most gamers. It is a game for committed war gamers. Those that will want to put the work into the design will have, I believe, a good experience, because it is a design that has a lot to offer. It is detailed, it's about a fascinating topic, it has a very strong historical feel, but again, alas, there is a price to pay, there is work that needs to be put into the learning phase of the game. So, not for everybody, not for most people, but I think that serious wargamers will be pleased by Bloody Steppes of Crimea, 1854. Oopsie daisy, I almost forgot. In this video I want to thank for viewers of my videos that backed my Kickstarter campaign for 2015. In this video I want to thank Rodney Smith, Kimberly Orr, Dan O, and David Stutley. Thank you to the four of you for backing my Kickstarter campaign, and thank you to all of you, my viewers, for watching my videos.